really feeling this, and for those of us who have seen the movie Timbuktu, as Alan mentioned, seen what's been shown to the masses of Fox News and CNN watchers, where we don't have any of our voices on, that's true, Matt Ho brought that out strongly in the last panel. People are being indoctrinated with the opposite of what Bill Bloom was talking about. They're being indoctrinated with the other and the enemy, worse than anything this government is doing. We have a huge effort to bring out the real story, and I want to call, I hope Cindy is okay.
She's okay.
Okay, but come back, Bill, so we can have a discussion, because I know you all want to come into this, and I want to remind you, to be recorded and heard, press the button on your mic and keep holding it while you're speaking so that it's green. Can I see a show of hands of people who'd like to get into the conversation? Okay. We'll start with two. And I also want to ask the panelists, to feel free to respond to anything that's been said. We definitely want to hear from all three of you again, and Cindy. So, Ty Berry.
Yeah, my question is that...
You won't be on the recording, sorry.
Oh, I see it. My question is that 12 years ago, millions of people took to the street. There was millions of people here in this country even took to the street, but worldwide. Now we know that there's a possibility, I hope a faint possibility, but there is a possibility that there might be a soon coming war with Iran. Or there might be whatever name they call it, a bombing campaign, or whatever they want to call it. Now, how many more millions will it take, or will it take more unity, in my opinion? Everybody putting down their flags and just going for it. How would you approach if there is an oncoming incursion into Iran?
Well, if we look at throughout history, big anti-war movements usually are created after one of the major powers that's at war has started to lose the war. Like in World War I, the war came to an end with revolutions in Russia and Germany, but both countries were losing. And the morale of the soldiers and the morale of the working classes in those societies had been so ripped apart that they were available for revolutionary change. That's what happened. And there's never been, in the beginning of a war, the available human material to really stop the war once the war makers have started it, have decided to go on the path. I use the example of Syria as what I thought was almost without precedence, but it had its own sort of unique distinctiveness. If our movement is simply reactive to whatever the next war thrust is, I think we can expect that we will always be, in some ways, tilting at windmills. Because at that moment, when the decision makers have made a decision to go to war, it's very hard to mount the kind of forces to stop it. What it would take, really, is, for instance, if the working class in the United States, if railroad workers went on strike, if truckers went on strike, and if port workers stopped unloading ships, the capitalist economy would be essentially gone, stopped, paralyzed in about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. There's nothing a protest movement has in its power compared to what the people who go to work, which is all of us, go to work and produce every day when we're an organized force. I think the question for us as a movement from a strategic point of view is not to simply be how can we stop each war at the moment that it's about to start, but how can we create a radical, profound movement of social change that means we're not just fighting about war as an issue, we're fighting about the system, and it is the system of imperialism. It's the system has bad policies, but it's not a policy. It hasn't been a policy for a long time. We actually do need a radical system, a radical change of system. And that means fighting on all levels, social, economic, on the anti-war front, in our communities, on our workplaces, if we go to church or synagogue or mosque, wherever it is where we're taking the message of radical social change. As to your immediate thing, should we all throw in and unite together? I think the answer must be yes. No matter what. We have to be able to show that we have the capacity for a unified movement, that all of the times that we've been struggling with disunity in the movement has been just a feather in the cap for those who are going to war. We have to be able to stand together and fight together. And if somebody says, well, I'm for the Democrats, or whatever, the main thing is we have to be in the streets together to say no. And as Cindy said, if we're standing alone, and when we came out to stand against the Libya war, by the way, we were in the streets all over the country, but there was 100 of us. Or 200 of us. Why was everybody, all the other groups, saying, well, you know, Gaddafi was threatening civilians in Benghazi, or he was a dictator, or completely buying the demonization line? Each time we say, at the end of the thing, we say, well, we'll never allow the demonization of the next imperialist target to work again, but then large parts of the movement actually go along. So we have to steadfastly say, yes, I disagree. I disagree with the last speaker, with Alan, in one sense. I don't think we should draw an equal sign between Islamic fundamentalism and imperialism. I hope that people in the Muslim world do that. But I think in the United States, we have to make sure that we understand that imperialism uses all of these demonization techniques, including the struggle against Islam, or in this case, Islamic State, in order to mobilize public opinion, and we have to counteract that tendency, even though I agree with him as a socialist, as a Marxist, that within those Muslim countries, I hope people fight that fight. But it's not our fight. It's not our fight. Our fight is to fight against imperialism, which uses anti-Islamic racism and poison to mobilize public opinion.
Well, Alan can't speak for himself, but I think in the article, and I really encourage people to read it, it says very clearly that it's the U.S. imperialists who have done by far the greater danger. And an example of what Brian brought out is that the Answer Coalition initiated, World Can't Wait picked it up, many of you have signed it, a letter directed to the people of Iran this week. And I think the message that conveyed is that there are people in this country who are saying to you in Iran, and the Iranians spread around the world, one of the last things we want is war on Iran. And actually, I put it out to progressive Iranians, and I got a lot of suggestions for publications in English and in Farsi. And the suggestion was, it's Persian New Year, why don't you write all those publications? They would publish them in the West, in the US, and then this would get back into Iran. And this is a concrete example of internationalism that I think we should pursue. The brother here in the black, next.
Thank you.
And
yeah, I would summarize by saying I think we are the victims of false hope. I think that was a great propaganda appeal of Obama's message, as we felt for it, because things have been so awful. And I think the powers that be would just love to see the movement continue to be so reactionary. And I think, picking up what Brian Becker said, it was demonstrated by Martin Luther King's call for a poor people's movement, a true movement of the people. And what happened to him? He was killed. And what has happened to so many leaders who have called for systematic revolutionary change? They have been killed. We need to pick up on it. We need to pick up that banner and march with that. And talk about how are we going to unite the people. And forget the parties. And forget the corporations. And forget the states. We have to find ways to unite the people. We have very limited time and energy and patience. And this is what I would urge the movement to go in the direction of.
I just want to say something very quickly. Thank you. You know, the 47 senators wrote a letter to Iran. So I don't even really care or pay attention. But that was bad that they did that, I guess. And people are like, oh, let's sign a petition to have them thrown in prison. And like as soon as you like write a petition to throw all 100 of those war criminals, those elitist war criminals in prison, I'll sign that one, you know, because how do we expect Republicans to act, you know? And so that's what, this is like beating a dead horse. I hate that because I love animals and I'm a vegan. I don't kill two birds with one stone. I feed two birds with one worm. And so it's our movement. I believe, like Brian Becker said, support Democrats fine, but I don't think that could be part of an anti-war movement. You know, that's your political movement, not your anti-war, anti-empire movement. Because obviously Democrats are just one half of the war party, you know, and so it has to, so I think in terms of war and empire and almost every other thing, you know, our movement has to be very nonpartisan and principled. We have to operate from our principles and not say, oh, you know, we've said this like all day. That, you know, they're really good people, but there's just so many forces against them to do the right thing. No. You know, we have to stop looking for answers in the Democratic Party because they're not there. You know, Democrats, as well as Republicans, you know, are enemies of peace. They're enemies of the worker. And we have to look at it that way. And I think that as a movement, a way to go forward is the way I hope and like Brian said, vote for Democrats, work for Democrats or whatever, but keep that separate, I think, from an anti-war movement, because Democrats are as big a war criminals and warmongers as the Republicans are.
I'm going to call on Ann Wright.
Well, you know, what was it, 13 years ago that George Bush talked about the axis of evil? Well, today we've talked about Iran, Iraq, and how about North Korea? I mean, if you look at what's going on in Northeast Asia, where you have the United States working with Japan to try to throw out a part of a constitution, to my knowledge, is the only constitution that has no war. The no war part of the Japanese Constitution, and yet it's under attack by the Abe government, starting with the Bush administration pushing the Japanese to get rid of that, and now the Obama administration encouraging it, and Ambassador Caroline Kennedy. So you have North Korea right up there. You know, with the largest military exercises of this year taking place right now with 30,000 U.S. military and the South Koreans. The response back from North Korea with missiles, an attack against the U.S. ambassador in South Korea, slicing him, because this fellow, who apparently has a long time history of calling for reconciliation and reunification of the Koreas, has been doing this so long that he's now mentally disturbed. Which, I mean, I think we're all mentally disturbed, aren't we, on all of this stuff? Well, I just wanted to mention one more opportunity that we do have as a part of movements. I mean, creating things that may bring some change. You never can tell what it might be. We have a new initiative called Women Cross the DMZ, where 30